Welcome to the world of Diablo.
It burns!
I'm your host, Scott Diablo Marcano.
Well, I'm not a crook.
I'm a filmmaker and comic book publisher, and I want to talk about something that's cool, or interesting, or entertaining, or gets us thinking.
Whoop-de-doo! What does it all mean, Basil?
So take a deep breath, take my hand, and let's take a journey together through the twisted world of Diablo. It was midnight on a moonless summer eve. I was scrunched up in the back seat of a beat-up sedan with several other dudes, crammed together like clowns in a circus car. At 15 years of age, I was the youngest of the group. We didn't have an official name for our gang, but even without a cool moniker, our violent intent was the same as any street gang from rougher parts of Los Angeles. We were here to do violence. Our mission on this balmy July evening was to defend our community from outside invaders. I am, of course, referring to our sworn enemies, the Vals. For those of you not familiar with the term Vals, it was the worst insult you could ever call anyone in Malibu in my youth. The phrase "Valley go home" was graffitied everywhere in Malibu, and it wasn't just a polite suggestion. It was a warning. Officially, Vals referred to people who lived in the Simi or San Fernando valleys. But, it pretty much included anyone who didn't live in Malibu proper. You could be from Timbuktu, didn't matter, brah. If you drove here and parked your sorry butt on our sand, you were a freaking Val, and we hated you. It was nothing personal, you understand. It was just that Malibu was for locals only, or at least that was the theory. In reality, most of the community didn't actually hate Vals with the same fervor as surfers and teenagers. In fact, the entire Malibu economy depended on a huge influx of tourists coming to the beach every spring and summer in order to survive. Without Vals, almost all the small businesses in Malibu would go broke. But such economic realities meant little to us at the time. All that mattered was that the Vals were dickheads who were trashing our beaches, hitting on our chicks, and stealing our waves. Supposedly they also murdered dolphins, but that was probably just a rumor. In short, Vals were our mortal enemies, and their invasion had to be checked by any means necessary. Hence, here I was, a nerdy kid who still played D&D, in a car with a bunch of older dudes ready to kick ass. We drove north to Malibu West. Then we pulled off PCH and followed a dirt road down to the bluffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. We exited the car without a word, and began trudging up a side hill, towards a parking area on the other side of a small rise. My face was painted up in camo war paint, like Martin Sheen at the end of Apocalypse Now. In my hands was a big, black axe handle that one of the older boys in our makeshift gang had given me. The other dudes were in full commando regalia as well. All were dressed entirely in black, and were carrying an assortment of weapons: baseball bats, lead pipes. One dude had a wrist rocket loaded with steel balls. Chemical weapons were being deployed as well. Our fearless leader had brought a large fertilizer container with a spray nozzle at the end of it. The metal jug was filled with a toxic mix of urine, spit, sour milk, and insect repellent. He called his disgustingly lethal concoction Val Juice. He'd actually taken the time to stencil that on the side of the spray container in case anybody was wondering what was inside. Ahead of us was a legendary surf spot known as Point Zero. It had one of the best breaks north of Trancas. Once, it was a semi-secret spot known only to locals, but word had gotten out over the years, and now it was always crowded in the summer. This particular evening, several Vals had parked their cars in the parking area just above it with the intent of camping overnight so they could steal our fucking waves the first thing in the morning. The scumbags! As we crept over the hilltop, we could see the enemy gathered around a campfire below us. Our nominal leader, the guy with the Val juice, whipped out a pair of binoculars and surveyed our prey. In a terse, military-sounding voice, he whispered what he saw. "A dozen Vals at 11 o'clock. I see beer and doobies being passed around, and a couple of chicks." "Are they hot?" one of the other dudes inquired. "Nah, total skanks, bro." "Just like a Val to bring an ugly chick to the beach." "Effing losers," another dude chimed in. "They'll probably have sex right on the beach and leave piles of jizz all over the sand for some poor kid to step on." "Shameless bastards," we all grumbled angrily as we slunk quietly back over the crest of the hill. We had a quick team meeting at that point to plan out our attack. Our leader drew out a diagram in the dirt using pebbles and sticks to represent the Vals and us. It was determined that I was to remain in the rear, being the youngest and the nerdiest. My job was to guard the escape car, while the rest of Attack Group A would sneak up behind the Vals and launch a surprise attack from the flank. After a few minutes of delivering a can of whoop-ass, Attack Group A would return to the escape car and we'd beat it before the Val reinforcements arrived. The plan sounded good to me, as I was secretly starting to have serious doubts about this endeavor. Staying out of the fight suited me just fine. On the car ride over, it had started to dawn on me that this wasn't going to be a fun adventure, like an imaginary raid on an orc camp. This was serious shit, and it was going to involve real violence. Perhaps my motivation was lacking because I had agreed to come more out of peer pressure than anything else. After all, I didn't even surf. But as it had been explained to me by our fearless leader, kicking Val asses was an obligation that all citizens of Malibu had to honor. It was our civic duty. Malibu, is a unique community that is often grossly misunderstood by outsiders. To the rest of the world, Malibu is an incredibly beautiful, affluent beach resort populated exclusively by movie stars, rock stars, and millionaires. However, as locals know, this is just a stereotype. Sure, there were the occasional movie star or mega-rich family living among us, but the majority of people I knew growing up in Malibu weren't rich or famous. They were scrappy, middle, and working-class families like my own. The population, in fact, was an odd mix of hippies, surfers, regular folks who had found a little slice of paradise along the coast that was close enough to the big city LA to commute to work, but was really its own bubble universe. The Malibu I knew as a teenager was both sophisticated and utterly provincial. But more than anything else, it was not a bunch of detached people living behind thick walls of mega mansions. It was a community. Loyalty, love, and roots ran deep in Malibu, and it still does. The ties that bind were felt as strongly as the bonds that one might find in an Italian neighborhood in Brooklyn, or a small southern town where everybody knew everyone. Perhaps it was the constant threat of wildfires and mudslides that bonded us together, or the isolation from Los Angeles, or the natural beauty or the gentle rhythm of the waves that rocked us all to sleep at night and hypnotized us into thinking we were all descended from Atlantis. Who knows? But there was no denying that we all felt a vibrant connection to Malibu and each other. Malibu, however sprawling and undefinable as it was our home. A home we'd spill blood to preserve and protect. It didn't matter that Zuma Beach was a public beach. The entire coastline north of Santa Monica Bay, all the way up to the county line, was for locals only. Now, locals protecting their turf from outsiders is nothing new or particular to Malibu. At least one thinks that Malibu surfers and teenagers are a unique band of psychopaths. In fact, surfers beating the crap out of outsiders is a phenomenon that occurs at almost every beach community in the world, where there's juicy waves and too many people trying to ride them. In Ventura and Santa Barbara, it's not the Vals that get their asses kicked, it's the Southers. In Hawaii, it's the Hallows, who get pummeled when they wander in the wrong break. The Bay Boys, a bunch of middle-aged surfers, have protected the Point Break in Palos Verdes so viciously for decades that their exploits have made national news, and a statewide effort was launched to stop them. On some level, surfer gang mayhem is understandable. Surfing isn't just a sport for many, it's a religion. Unlike other sports like skateboarding, basketball, baseball, etc., where there really isn't anything other than ability that would prevent one from enjoying the activity, surfing is unique. It requires tapping into a limited resource, a good break. Only a couple of dudes and dudettes can surf a wave at a time without bumping into each other, and that creates a scarcity problem. Hence the need to round up dudes with axe handles and baseball bats and canisters of homemade Val juice to stem the invasion. Still, the surfing aspect of gang violence in beach communities is only part of the story. As I mentioned before, I didn't even surf. Neither did half the guys in the gang that night. They just wanted to kick Val asses because, well, they were outsiders. In this regard, locals-only mentality is just a Malibu variation of a much more disturbing and ancient human sin. Our need to attack anyone from an outside group. As an old Arab saying goes, I against my brothers, I and my brothers against my cousins, I and my brothers and my cousins against the world. As a society, we tend to see the world as circles of allegiances, and view people on the outskirts of our particular tribe as a threat. This explains why immigrants are always easy targets for abuse. But it isn't just immigrants. This logic often transcends physical boundaries. Home turf can be defined by anything that gives us a sense of community, be it loyalty to a sports team, our religion or non-religion, political affiliation, race, language, etc., etc. In my humble opinion, this fear and loathing of the other is the driving force behind genocides and much of the misery in the world today. Jesus told us to love our neighbor, and we do for the most part. The problem comes when we draw the line between us and them too sharply. Then we don't see people as our neighbors. They become the other in our minds, and we decide it's fair game to attack and abuse them. They're not people anymore. They're just vowels. Back to point zero. I stood by the escape car that night and waited with bated breath for the Droogs in Attack Group A to launch their flanking maneuver on the Val campfire. I couldn't see what was happening because I was down the hill, so I had to listen carefully. At any moment I expected to hear sounds of violence break out, but to my dismay, after 10 long minutes, all I could hear was the waves crashing against the rocky shore below. Feeling both anxious and bored, I finally decided to walk up the small hill to investigate. However, as I neared the crest of the hill, I suddenly heard several loud cries and screams ring out in the darkness. I started sprinting up the slope to see what was happening, but just as I reached the crest, wham! A dark figure suddenly exploded out of the darkness and smashed right into me. The force of the collision knocked the wind out of me and sent me flying backwards onto my back. As I gasped for breath on the ground, I saw several dark figures run past me, running as fast as they could back down the hill towards the escape car. I recognized them by their war paint. It was my friends. One of them glanced back at me as he hauled ass down the hill and shouted back, "Run for it! The Vals are coming, dude!" I staggered to my feet, gasping for breath, and looked over the edge of the hill. Just a few yards away, I could see a dozen burly Vals running up from the campfire, heading straight for me. Several of them had makeshift weapons in their hands, tire irons, T-branches, and broken beer bottles. One was holding his face and screaming something about his eyes burning. I presumed he'd been hit with the Val juice. I could see blood streaming down the face of another one. It looked like the dude had been hit in the face with a bat and gotten his nose busted. They looked like an army of mad giants as they hurtled towards me. One of them saw me and shouted out, "There's one of those fuckers! Kill him!" Terror shot through my bones. Still unable to catch my breath, I spun around and raced back down the hill as fast as I could with blood-thirsty Vals hot on my heels. I was certain that if they caught me, they'd beat me to death. The escape car was just a few yards away, but all my friends had already climbed inside. Suddenly the sedan peeled out and roared off without waiting for me. A cloud of dust flew up into my face as the car sped away. "Wait for me, you assholes!" I screamed in futility as the car barreled away down the dirt road. My fellow Malibuites were freaking abandoning me. The Vals were almost upon me now. I dared not look back, but I swear I could feel their hot breath on the back of my neck as I ran. I could hear their heavy footfalls directly behind me. In a moment or two, one of them would tackle me, and then it'd be all over. They'd rip me to pieces like a pack of rabid wild dogs. Just when I thought it was all over, I saw the escape car in front of me slow slightly. One of my buds had rolled down his back window and yelled, "Quick, jump for it, brah!" I didn't know how I did it exactly. Must have been some sort of animal survival instinct taking over. But I did a huge leap and somehow managed to sail headfirst through the open back window into the back seat of the moving car. The Vals were so close behind me that one of them managed to grab my foot, which was still sticking out the window. Luckily for me, my shoe flew off in his hand. The driver stomped on the gas and we escaped down the dirt road. The enraged Vals continued to chase after us for several yards, shouting murderous insults and hurling rocks as we drove away into the night. We hit PCH and raced back to Malibu West. Everyone was breathing hard now, in a state of shock as we drove along the highway. No one said a word for several moments. Finally, our fearless leader said, "Fucking A, that was rad. We didn't leave any behind, did we?" "Nope, we're all here," someone murmured. Even pussy-ass Marcano made it out alive. Everyone laughed, even me, but it was more out of relief than anything else. "Shit, where did all those fuckers come from?" somebody said. "Fuck if I know. They must have been jerking off in the bushes or something," somebody else said. Our fearless leader turned and looked at us with a twisted grin on his face. "You see me spray that Val bastard in the face with my juice?" "Hells yeah, dude," the kid sitting next to him replied. "That was fucking awesome." "Dude, I totally clocked that other dickhead with my bat." Everyone was laughing and carrying on now. Even though we had retreated in the face of superior numbers, the general consensus was that we had won the engagement. The message had been sent. The Vals would know that Point Zero was our break. The driver would reach down and popped a tape into the cassette player. Locals Only by the Surf Punks blasted out the stereo speakers. We all started singing the chorus together as we raced past the intersection at Trancas, waving our weapons out the car windows like hooligans as we roared in unison, "Locals Only!" I never went out on another midnight Val hunting mission after that. Not that I'm a pussy, mind you, but after the adrenaline of the night's exploits passed and sobriety set in, I realized how stupid the whole misadventure was. Someone could have been seriously hurt. I actually felt bad for the Val who got sprayed in the eyes with Val juice, and the other one whose nose was broken by a baseball bat. Vals or not, they hadn't done anything to us other than to try to surf. What gave us the right to commit acts of indiscriminate violence against them? More disturbing, what was the next step in this game? In spite of our bravado, I knew the Vals weren't really going away. What were we going to do next? Drive them off? With guns? Shoot at them? Or plant bombs on the bluffs above Point Zero and blow them to smithereens? Over time it began to dawn on me as well that weekend Vals weren't the real threat to Malibu and our way of life. Millionaires buying mega mansions and driving out the middle class was, and remains, a far bigger threat to our little coastal community. Still, the rallying cry of Valley Go Home and general hatred of Vals never really dissipated during my youth in Malibu. I saw countless incidents of Vals' cars' windows being smashed when they parked along Morning View Drive. I saw trespassers being beaten to a pulp while trying to circumvent the gate guarding the access to the Little Doom Cove. Our fearless leader would continue to hawk loogies at Vals as he drove by them on PCH. These incidents continue to this day. I must admit I was greatly amused to read recently that paparazzi were whining about locals attacking them and vandalizing their cars when they tried to bypass the Point Doom gate to get a picture of Matthew McConaughey surfing. Locals only, papa bitches. Don't mess with Malibu. To be fair, there are two sides to this overzealous love of Malibu. The dark end of the spectrum, of course, is when locals only ethos turns into unprovoked acts of violence. The flip side of this intense passion is seen in the countless ways Malibu residents work hard to protect and preserve the natural beauty and splendor of our coastal enclave. It's also visible in the strong sense of community and connection everyone who's been part of Malibu generally feels for one another. Locals only can mean violence, but it can also translate into a deeply personal shared experience that only those who went to Malibu Park Junior High and ate popcorn at the Malibu Cinema can truly appreciate. No matter our economic situation or whether our families were poor or super rich, no matter our religion, culture, or race, regardless of our political tribe, we were all and remain Malibuites. Even though I no longer live in California, I still feel it. Malibu is part of my soul. Funny enough, having traveled the world and gone to college far away on the East Coast, most of my Facebook friends are still people who I grew up with in Malibu. Although I only really hang out with a few of them on a regular basis, there's no denying the unique sense of community that I continue to share with everyone from my youth. It's not just nostalgic memories of the past. There's something deeply ingrained in all of us that comes from living in a very special place. Malibu will always be part of us, like grains of sand that won't come out of our shoes. Malibu will always define and bond us together. It's something only locals can truly understand.